Socrates first called philosophy down from heaven, and gave it a place in cities, and introduced it even into men's homes, and forced it to make inquiry into life and morals, and things good and evil. His manifold method of discussion, the variety of his subjects, and the greatness of his genius, consecrated by the memory and the writings of Plato, gave rise to many schools of mutually dissenting philosophers. Cicero, Tusculan Disputations 5.10-11. Socrates was the father of a new method of study. His thoughts were the seed corn of systems. His pupils were the teachers of centuries. Each bump of his brain was the nucleus of a philosophical school. Hardly had he left the world, than the strong and simple light he shed was scattered in various hues by the prismatic minds that had surrounded him or that succeeded him. Socrates belongs to the order of the prophets. He is in that class of persons, appearing in all ages, who feel their connection with the divine, and who speak and act with an insight far beyond the range of their own account of it. Rufus Jones, Mystical Religion, p. 58. He did more to found true philosophy on its legitimate basis than any other master. Ralph Waldo Emerson, The Character of Socrates. Finally, in the light of this knowledge, care only for the soul and its ultimate good, knowing that its best element, the philosophic, is what unites us with the divine and lives forever. Act always in the knowledge that the soul's association with the body is only a brief episode, or series of episodes, in its eternal existence. In that faith Socrates died, when without it he could have lived, and the whole force of Plato's remarkable mind was directed at proving that he was right. Socrates didn't leave us any writings of his own, so this'll be based on the Socrates character presented in Plato's dialogues. Whenever I say Socrates, I mean the Platonic Socrates. Socrates' main point is a sort of intellectual humility. This quote attributed to him lay this out. I am the wisest of all the Greeks, because I know that I know nothing. To understand Socrates' point we have to understand the political context in which he lived. Socrates lived in Athens around 300 BC. Athens at this time was a democracy. Socrates also witnessed the Peloponnesian War, a brutal 30-year war between Athens and Sparta, which Athens lost. Much of the fault for Athens' defeat could be blamed on the foolish decisions made by the democracy. One day during the war, Socrates was the head of the Athenian legislature. The legislature was enraged at some Athenian generals, and wanted to break the law and put them to death without a trial. Socrates refused to let them, and was almost killed by the mob. They didn't end up killing him, but the next day when he stepped down from the legislature the man who replaced him put the generals to death. These life experiences made Socrates very skeptical of democracy. On top of this, Socrates believed that the gods tasked him with finding a man wiser than himself. To do so, he spent his life discussing things with his fellow Athenian citizens, and he repeatedly found that most people have no idea what they're talking about. Here are some quotes from Plato's Apology which give a good summary. I went to one man after another. The result of my mission was just this. I found that the men most in repute were all but the most foolish, and that some inferior men were really wiser and better. I went to one who had the reputation of wisdom, and observed to him. His name I need not mention. He was a politician whom I selected for examination, and the result was as follows. When I began to talk with him, I could not help thinking that he was not really wise, although he was thought wise by many, and wiser still by himself, and I went and tried to explain to him that he thought himself wise, but was not really wise, and the consequence was that he hated me, and his enmity was shared by several who were present and heard me. I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing, and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. When I left the politicians, I went to the poets, and I further observed that upon the strength of their poetry they believed themselves to be the wisest of men in other things in which they were not wise. At last I went to the artisans. But I observed that even the good artisans fell into the same error as the poets, because they were good workmen they thought that they also knew all sorts of high matters, and this defect in them overshadowed their wisdom. Therefore I asked myself on behalf of the oracle, whether I would like to be as I was, neither having their knowledge nor their ignorance, or like them in both, and I made answer to myself and the oracle that I was better off as I was. In sum, I talk to everyone, and they all pretend to know things they have no idea about. They're less wise than I am because I admit when I am ignorant. Socrates' point is this: most people pretend to know things because they have an ego. They want the power, money, and status that comes with knowledge and wisdom, and so they pretend to have it even when they don't. Most people cannot judge truth from fiction, and so they are easily manipulated by these pretenders to knowledge. Socrates wants us to realize A. It is in man's nature to believe things are true without proof. B. After learning this, be very careful when making claims about what's true, and C. To learn philosophy so we can better assess whether our beliefs are true. We have no way of knowing 2,500 years later. We know that Plato would write in a rhetorical style, and we have no way of knowing if what Plato said was in any way true. Lots of philosophers question Plato's writing as not being historical. Why would anybody believe what he said about Socrates? Plato was not a formal student of Socrates. He would just follow him around with a bunch of other kids. It is said that Socrates was a mystic, so I would say that consulting the oracles was one of the great things that Socrates did. Socrates may have been the last pre-Socratic before Athens subdued all other forms of belief. We know about Plato and Aristotle only because they lived in Athens. There is nothing special or unusual about those two philosophers. Remember, there were hundreds of philosophers that all disagreed. If Plato had not founded an academy, he would be unknown. Let's assume that Socrates was a character that Plato made up and move on. The contributions are extensive, but he will forever be seen as the creator of the Socratic method, essentially a process whereby one person leads another person to make their own conclusion on a topic instead of being spoon-fed the answer. A modern version is sometimes called the 5 why process, which I call the why infinity loop. Ask why to each response to a question until the answers circle back onto themselves, exhausting the topic entirely. He also supported the idea certitude as a myth, something still in evidence today. Certainty is for fools, absolute certainty is beyond foolish and simply impossible to support. Blessings.